The statements made in this program reflect only the opinions and/or research of the guests and are their sole responsibility.
Hi everyone. In 2017, the New York Times revealed that the American government had a discrete unit studying the UFO phenomenon. Among those who worked there, one man could no longer keep silent and dared to speak out. That is the very subject of this new episode of Face au Mystère, UFOs and Disclosure, the day everything changed, an exclusive with Luis Elizondo. Hello, Luis.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here for this book, Imminent. This is quite an incredible book because, honestly, I learned a lot of things about you. Since 2017, of course, we've received information coming from the United States. We've heard all sorts of things, really, meaning we followed the congressional hearings, and I wanted to get your perspective because it was through you that everything started in 2017. So, just for the record, let me remind everyone that you are a former senior intelligence official. You headed AATIP, a special unit tasked with studying the UFO phenomenon, unexplained aerial phenomena, or UFOs as you call them in the United States. So I read that you are the son of a former anarchist who worked and fought alongside Fidel Castro. So the first question I wanted to ask you, even though your father settled in the United States, how did he feel about you joining the American government?
Yeah, so my father was initially, as a young boy living in Cuba, basically joined Castro's ranks to overthrow a dictator named Batista at the time. And when Castro finally took power, he had been promising freedom and elections. But when Castro took power, he actually decided against the things that he told the people he would do. So my father then joined the resistance or the rebellion against Fidel Castro, against communism. And that's when my father first entered the ranks of the CIA as a member of the ill-fated Brigade 2506, which was the CIA invasion force to invade Cuba. And my father was subsequently captured and placed in prison for several years. And then upon his release, he came to the United States. My family is in political exile from Cuba. So my family came to the United States, and this country afforded opportunities to my family that no other country would or could afford. And I guess that's how I began my journey eventually into intelligence, because of my father's background in my early childhood, being raised by my father. I was always tangentially exposed to the U.S. intelligence community.
So the United States and America, which is the country of free speech, it's even your First Amendment. So maybe that's why you decided to speak out in 2017 through the New York Times and through Leslie Kean, whom we had here on BTLV. You decided to reveal what you had learned during your years within AATIP. So I still want to remind everyone who gives you a hard time, because I learned some incredible things. Speaking out came at a cost for you. You talked about it with your wife. Your wife doesn't understand why, at a certain point, you decided to leave Washington to speak out, and you went on to experience some absolutely incredible things. We'll come back to that. In this show, what I wanted to do, ultimately, was to unravel the story, go back to the basics, and retrace everything. I learned from your book that at the beginning of your career, you had already worked on cases that could be described as X-Files.
Yeah, when I first entered the program in 2009, idea what the program did. They just told me they needed somebody to bring counterintelligence and security expertise to the problem, a problem which I had no idea what it was until I was finally briefed into the program. And the reality is that our government was investigating and continues to investigate anomalous phenomenon, UAP, or I guess you might say UFO in the vernacular. I was never, as a young federal agent or in the military or in college, I was never, as a young person, interested in science fiction. I wasn't particularly interested in Star Wars as a child. And when I went to school, at the University of Miami, I studied medicine. I graduated as a microbiologist and an immunologist. So I've always been a disciple of the scientific methods and principles since I can remember. And then later in my profession, I became a special agent, an investigator in intelligence, where I considered myself just a facts ma'am kind of person, if you will, or just facts oriented. So I never really considered the topic of UAP very seriously. And a funny story I'll share with you. When I first got into the program, I remember the then director, a gentleman named Jim Lakatsky, asking me directly what I thought about UFOs. And I thought about it for a moment, and I answered him honestly. I said, I don't. And he said to me, he said, what do you mean? You don't believe in UFOs? And I said, no, that's not what you asked. You asked me, what do I think of them? And the answer is, I don't. I don't have the time or the luxury to think about them. I'm too involved in other national security issues. And he looked at me and he said, that's fair, but don't let your analytic bias get the best of you, because what you're going to learn in this program may challenge any preconceived narrative you might have about UFOs. And he was absolutely right.
So you just mentioned national security. We learned in 2017 that there was this discrete unit funded at $22 million a year, which had spent $22 million to study the UFO phenomenon. At the outset, was the concern of the Americans more about national security than about extraterrestrial life and these craft that could potentially be piloted by beings from elsewhere?
Well, this is a very interesting question you ask, because this conversation is still evolving to this very day. My government over the last 8 years has made some incredible announcements and has admitted things that it has kept secret for nearly 80 years. When I first was in the program, very few people knew what we were doing. There was a very small list of people that were allowed to know what we were doing. Later on, when I went public, I think there was this initial sense of disbelief by the American people that we were spending tax dollars studying UFOs. Keeping in mind, my country had denied this fact for decades before. So I think people were surprised and perhaps even a little bit shocked. But as time went on and more information began to become released, and more individuals and whistleblowers came forward and began talking about the U.S. government's efforts investigating UFOs, I think the U.S. media began to take the topic much more seriously. And in turn, so did Congress, and so did the American people. We are still having this conversation right now as a nation, but I think it's much easier now to have the conversation. There was a time that if I wanted to have this conversation, I would have to whisper, and I'd have to have this conversation inside of within a very sensitive facility inside the Pentagon. Now people can walk the halls of the Pentagon openly and have conversations about this topic, because it has been legitimized, and because the U.S. government has admitted that the program was in fact real and had real results.
So over the course of your years of service, you will, let me remind everyone that you are in the military, you served in Afghanistan, you're going to Iraq, you're a man of the field, so no one can pull the wool over your eyes. However, over the course of your career, you will meet some incredible people such as Dr. Alputov, who is important to you because he will even introduce you to remote viewing. That is, he will ask you to work on your sensitivity in order to try to envision the unimaginable. And as you go along, as we learn in the book, you will come to understand over time that everyone who works on the UFO phenomenon ultimately taps into a certain sensitivity.
I think they have experience in that field. I think they are sensitive to it because they go back several decades working in an official capacity, but a very secret capacity with the United States, for the United States, focusing their efforts on UFOs. These are very serious individuals. They are scientists with impeccable academic and certifications. These, in some cases, represent the very finest of the American scientific communities. And we had a lot of experts and specialists. We had theoretical physicists, we had astrophysicists, rocket scientists, mathematicians. We had a lot of expertise available to us to really try to figure out what we were seeing with the sensor data, with the gun camera footage and the FLIR footage and the radar data. It took a lot of people to really analyze and look over this information. At the end of the day, yes, I believe you're absolutely correct. Many of these individuals, other than myself, I did not have any experience prior to AATIP in the UFO topic, but others did. And my experience prior to getting into AATIP, some of it was in advanced avionics, so protecting sensitive technologies, understanding how first stage solid rocket boosters work, understanding how satellite telemetry works, understanding advanced aerospace and space-based systems was something that I had did prior in my career. So maybe that helped me be perhaps a little bit more prepared eventually when I took over AATIP in 2010.
What's amazing when you look at American history is that the United States has always been interested in these extraordinary phenomena. We remember Project Blue Book, we remember Stargate and so on, which, by the way, was directed by Al Puthoff. And then you, in the midst of all this, will move forward, build your career, and you will discover and come to understand that there really are unidentified flying objects, more commonly known as UFOs. And you will come across cases like the Colares case in Brazil, where you will realize that these objects actually targeted people. What was your reaction? Because at first you don't consider it, and then suddenly you become aware of it. What went through your mind? Did you think, wait, is this a subject that's been hidden from me for a long time?
Yeah, and therein lies the problem, because I think this topic has been misunderstood for a very long time. And there's a bit of a, shall I say, a schizophrenic approach to addressing this subject, because there's a lot of different equities involved. So if I was wearing my national security hat, my military hat, certainly there are reasons to be concerned and alarmed. First and foremost, if you want to determine if something is a threat, it's a very simple calculus. It's capabilities versus intent. Now, we've seen some of the capabilities of these UAP, but we have no idea the intent. And so therefore, we have no idea if these things are a potential threat or not. What we do know is that they can outperform anything we have in our current inventory. So that's problematic, because if this technology belonged to a foreign adversary of the United States, then clearly this would be a significant issue for my country, again, from a national security perspective. But there's a whole other perspective of this topic that involves humanity and is not necessarily related to national security. And this is a topic that I have said before affects everybody equally and yet differently, perhaps depending how you were raised and your cultural background, your religious background. This is a topic that affects everybody from a psychological perspective, from a sociological perspective, from a philosophical perspective, and a theological perspective. And so because of that, this is a conversation that is bigger than national security and involves really the citizens of the world. We should all be having this conversation. What does this mean to us? Should we be afraid? I don't think so. Should we be cautiously optimistic? Yes, perhaps we should. Although we are walking into the unknown, there lies a lot of potential benefit for our species if we can understand this technology.
I refer to a quote by Donald Reagan, who once said that if extraterrestrials existed, it would ultimately be a good opportunity for humanity to come together and no longer be Moroccans, Americans, French, Russians, Norwegians, but to be Earthlings. Maybe that's the thing that could save us and save humanity. The fratricidal, or in any case internal wars that we experience on Earth could disappear, perhaps with a world army that could monitor what is happening and a humanity that is much, much stronger. At least that's what we hope for. You know a very well-known French astrophysicist named Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée, a prominent figure in the field, recently stated in a significant interview that extraterrestrial beings had, in fact, killed people. So I heard you at the US Congress say that some people had been injured and compensated by the American government. When you say that before Congress, let me remind you that when you're in Congress, there's the risk of perjury. And that's perhaps the worst thing. You know, lying to Congress is very dangerous. When you say that, you are officially validating the reality of the UFO phenomenon when you say that people have been injured by these craft.
Yes, that is my official position based upon what I learned and what I was to in AATIP. You addressed a couple things here. Let me go back a little bit and address something. You said something about the world and humanity, and I want to show you something here. Forgive me just one moment. This is a globe of the Earth that I keep on my desk, but there's something wrong with this globe, because the reality is, if you were to go to space and be an astronaut and look down upon from the ISS space station and look at Earth, you would notice it doesn't look anything like this globe. There's no lines, there's no borders. There's just water and there's land. And all of humanity lives together on this land. There are no borders, there's no boundaries in reality. And so we're all stuck on this little planet together. And you realize that very profoundly when you go to space and you look down at Earth. You realize we are all in this together and equally. And so I do believe this topic affects humanity writ large, and it's something that I don't believe any country should control the narrative. Not the United States, not France, not Russia, nobody. You know, this is I think a profound moment for our species. And I think we need to work together. I think Ronald Reagan, well, I hope Ronald Reagan was correct in his statement. Unfortunately, sometimes human beings can be surprising, and sometimes we behave in ways that are not very logical. So I don't know, maybe this won't bring countries together, but if it doesn't, it should, I believe. This is a topic, like I said, that affects all of us. And so it's incumbent upon governments, world governments, to work together, because there are other governments that have UFO programs and they have data, and we could share that data amongst all of us. So that's my perspective on that.
When it comes to UFOs, the United States is synonymous with cover-ups. That is to say, we always get the feeling that it's one step forward, two steps back. It all starts with Roswell. Well, modern ufology begins with Kenneth Arnold in '47 and so on. Then very quickly we have the Roswell incident. Let's recall, the Army announces they've recovered a flying saucer, and the very next day, no, move along, there's nothing to see here. So you will meet Al Puthoff several times, who will tell you, yes, Roswell is real.
Yeah. If anybody knows the history of Hal Puthoff, I would consider him an American treasure. He is a very good scientist. He's a very good intelligence officer. He has worked for several of the major intelligence organizations for decades here in the United States. And furthermore, he's also you might call him the godfather of the CIA's psychic program. More recently known as Stargate, and before that, Grill Flame, and several other names before that. But in essence, he was he established the CIA's program to use individuals to conduct psychic espionage against adversaries, among many other things. We also had Dr. Kit Green with us, who was at one point in charge of the CIA's, they called it the Weird Desk, or the X-Files, you might call it. Dr. Eric Davis, who's also a legend in the world of astrophysics. He is a renowned scientist and a very accomplished academic. So we had a long list of individuals who I would consider legends, to include Jacques Vallée. You said it yourself. Jacques Vallée is an extraordinary man. He's not only an incredible Frenchman, he's an incredible American too. He has worked side by side with the U.S. government for decades. both in this topic of UFOs and other topics. An extremely intelligent person, and certainly I would consider a blessing to have on our team.
So I'm coming back to Roswell. We successfully recovered various material debris, but also, quite surprisingly, some biological debris, didn't we?
Yeah, so what I've been allowed to say is that biological specimens were recovered from the crash of Roswell. Now, why do I say biological specimens? Because people often use the term bodies a lot, and I'm not sure that's I think that may be a bit premature, because when you say the term a body, most of us think of this in Spanish, the word cuerpo, right? So we think bilateral symmetry, 2 arms, 2 legs, perhaps a head with 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. But that's assuming a lot. When the crash occurred, a lot of that biological tissue was damaged. Also, it was recovered before I was ever even born. So I'm very, very careful to use my words carefully. A lot of people say how many bodies were recovered. I can't tell you for sure, because I wasn't there. I've read the reports, and I knew people who were part of the investigation later on. But that's why I choose the word biological specimens, that there were biologics of unknown origin that were recovered as a result of that crash.
You say that you have seen and read reports mentioning the recovery of material and biological objects?
Yeah. There was a lot of documentation, and I think people would be surprised to learn just how much documentation exists right now in the U.S. government regarding UAP, formal official documentation. In some cases, this documentation is very, very explicit. I think people would be surprised to know that the U.S. government has in its possessions video and photographs and intelligence reports that go into quite a bit of detail. In some cases, we know even where the specific crash site was and what was done with the material. I have to be very careful what I say, because I still maintain a security clearance with the U.S. government. So I am restricted from discussing anything that is considered classified. With that said, one of the reasons why I wrote my book was because I knew it would have to go through the Pentagon for security review. And I knew that if at some point that book was released, then what would happen is that this was the government's approval, final approval, saying, yes, you can talk about this. And if there are still portions in the book that are blocked out because the government doesn't want me talking about it. But the purpose of writing my book is really to just establish for the record what AATIP was doing and what did we learn. And that was the truth. And the fact that my government approved the release for it, is I think it's historic, because it's really a first major step in my government acknowledging and admitting, yes, we've been studying UFOs for a very long time.
So in your book, we learned that astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was passionate about the UFO phenomenon and whose family lived near Roswell, said that local ranchers had been threatened with death. That's something we've heard a lot, meaning move along, don't say anything, or else it's death for you. Why hide in the end the reality of this phenomenon for so many years? Are we afraid that it would shake up humanity and the established order as it has been on which our societies are founded?
I think that was initially the concern. If you look at when Roswell occurred, it was really right at the beginning of the atomic age and the beginning of the Cold War between the United States and then Soviet Union. There was a real threat that both the United States and Russia had atomic weapons at the time, and we were both moving towards nuclear weapons. And so having a discussion about UFOs, about objects that we can't stop, we don't know where they're from, we don't know how they work, we don't know what they're doing, and we don't know who's flying them, is not a very good conversation to have with the American people. Let me give you 2 quick stories of examples where governments have done this in the past. In 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the deserts by the Dead Sea. And it was many years before the scientific community publicly released the translations of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the reason for that was because they were afraid that it would contradict the current understanding of the Judeo-Christian belief system. That was a concern for them. They thought it was destabilizing, that it could threaten the moral fabric of society. Another example, very more operationally focused, was in the Soviet Union. During the Cold War, my country had a peace treaty with Russia, and part of that treaty stated we would not fly manned reconnaissance missions over Russia. And what did we do? Well, my country did exactly that. The CIA worked with Lockheed Skunk Works to develop a plane known as the U-2. And this plane, in theory, would fly faster and higher than any other airplane. So fast and so high that the Russians would never even be able to detect us. And so for the first few missions, we thought it was a success. The Russians didn't even respond. So we assumed that they couldn't see it. It wasn't until the Russians developed the SA-2 surface-to-air missile and successfully shot down a U-2 plane and paraded the pilot Powers and his wreckage in front of the United Nations, did we learn that Russia was actually tracking every flight. In fact, the Soviet Union didn't even admit to their own people that we were flying the U-2 until the Russians had an ability to neutralize the threat. In essence, why admit a problem as a government for which there's no solution? Wait till you have a solution and then have that conversation with the citizens and the people. I suspect that may also be part of it. And then last but not least, there is a very real liability here. A lot of things were done illegally. Money was spent. A lot of money was spent without congressional approval, and in some cases without the president knowing and authorizing it. So that is an illegal function. And so there are people that are very concerned that they might wind up going to jail, quite frankly. So we have to say this is not an easy just admit the truth to the American people and the world. We have to do this right. I've told people before there's a difference between doing things right and doing things right now. And I think we have only one chance to do it right. And so the conversation we're having may be a little slower than people want. But if you look back in the last 8 years, I would submit to you that we have come further in this conversation in the last 8 years than we have in the last 80.
So it's true that I've been talking about UFOs for 13 years now, and we've never talked about this subject as much and as openly as we do today. And indeed, we get daily information about the UFO phenomenon. So to get back to and conclude the Roswell chapter, we learned that the wreckage from the crash was recovered by a private aerospace company for reverse engineering. And in fact, after this crash, you say, and it's written in the book, that the American government drafted a universal UFO manual in the hours and days following this mysterious incident in New Mexico. There are 7 very important points. I'm going to list them because they really explain everything clearly. Admit nothing and deny everything. Make counter-accusations. Recover the wreckage of the crashed craft. Take the recovered materials to undisclosed locations. Work secretly on reverse engineering. Intimidate witnesses so they say nothing, and threaten anyone who utters a single word about this subject. Here we can see that, is this actually the period that's particularly conducive to this kind of mistrust? We're right in the middle of the Cold War, as you mentioned. Is that why the Americans and the government said, above all, don't say anything. We've recovered a technology. It's an extra advantage against the Russian ogre.
Absolutely. That we do not want to broadcast to our adversaries what we know about UFOs, because then they may double their efforts to try to learn from us what we already know. On the other side of that argument, what we don't want to do is broadcast or advertise to our adversaries what we don't know, what our intelligence gaps are, because that's a vulnerability. And that too can be exploited by an adversary. So we have to be very, very careful as a nation how we have this conversation, because what we don't want to do is have this technology inadvertently in the hands of a rogue nation. You can imagine this technology in the hands of a despot or a dictator. It could be terrifying consequences. So again, we have to be very careful how we have this conversation. It's a bit like threading the eye of a needle. We have to be very careful.
Within AATIP, you say you had numerous pieces of evidence in your hands proving the reality of UFOs. What kind of evidence? Did you only have files, or did you actually have physical evidence in your hands?
What I'm allowed to say that I've held in my hand exotic material of unknown origin that was manufactured at a time that we did not have the capability to manufacture that material like that. That's what I'm allowed to say, and one can certainly read between the lines what that means. The bottom line is we're talking about material that, for all intents and purposes, is likely not made by human beings.
And at the same time, when you read your book, you realize that these exotic exogenous materials, call them what you will, come from absolutely mind-blowing technologies, because in 2003, you were in Iraq. They show you a tank that has been pierced by something that doesn't leave the kind of mark usually left by a bullet. So we ultimately realized that these objects possess technology far more advanced than what we've developed here on planet Earth. And so we should always be wary of them, right?
Yes, but I prefer to be more cautiously optimistic than fear. And let me tell you why. There are moments in our species development where there are these evolutionary jumps forward, and they don't happen very often in one's lifetime. So it can be a little strange when it happens, but I would submit to you it's necessary for the evolution of our species. And perhaps one of the first paradigm moments we faced was when humankind crawled out of Plato's cave for the first time and gazed upon the heavens and realized how big our universe really is. Perhaps the second time was when somebody had two rocks, two stones, and struck them together and created a spark, and for the first time could illuminate the darkness. And those monsters that are hiding behind the trees, well, they're just bushes. And perhaps the last time our species had a paradigm moment like this, a new realization, was when two fishermen were standing on a beach together, and one fisherman looks to the other and says, "Today is the day I sail over the horizon." And of course his friend says, "No, you don't want to do that because the earth is flat. You'll fall off the earth, and there's sea monsters or giant kraken that will tear your boat apart." And of course we laugh about that now, but the reality is that fisherman was partly right. There really are monsters out there, except for these monsters are called great white sharks. They're called blue whales. They're called the great squid of the Pacific. And they're not really monsters, are they? They're just part of nature. They're part of our new understanding of our new paradigm. And so perhaps with the topic of UFOs, I remain optimistic. I believe that we are at yet just at another threshold, about to enter into a new paradigm. I think we are standing yet on another beach, looking at a new horizon that we're about to sail over. And I think it's quite natural. I think it's normal for people to be afraid. But if you look at where we were in the 1960s, the United States in just 10 years, the United States from the early 1960s to 1969 during the space race to the moon, over 6,200 industries, not products, industries were invented and developed in the course of those 10 years just to put a person on the moon. And now we have products like the LED light bulb, like the CAT scan and MRIs, products that have long outlived the initial intent of their development and have continued to enrich humanity. So if one only has to look in the past to realize that there's a lot of opportunity here. There was a calculation that during the USS Nimitz event, one of these objects had traversed from 80,000 feet to 50 feet over the water and then popped back up again. And it did so in less than a second. Now, the energy requirement to do that is more than the total sum energy of the United States for 3 years. So think about that for a moment. Imagine if we had the ability to understand that type of energy and harness that energy. Perhaps it's a new form of clean energy. Perhaps we could improve our own planet. I choose to remain optimistic, cautiously optimistic, rather than fear.
So indeed, this reverse engineering, because that's exactly what we're talking about, might allow us to make progress. It's said that fiber optics supposedly come from these objects from elsewhere, that the internet and so on too. So we hope things will go in that direction and not the other way around. Although Stephen Hawking in his time said, be careful not to disturb them too much, because if they find out we're here, it's not certain we'll make it out. I'd like to come back to George Knapp, whom you know, right, and who came on BTLV a few weeks ago. I suggest we watch a clip from his appearance, and we'll be right back afterwards.
When he was here.
It's a deep, dark secret. I don't think, my personal opinion is, I don't think they are ever going to let this out. I don't think there's ever going to come a day when the U.S. president stands up and makes an announcement that, yes, it's true, we have visitors from somewhere else, we have recovered saucers, we have crash retrievals and reverse engineering programs. They're never going to say it. For a couple of reasons. One is national security concerns. Our government, our secret government, is in a race to understand the technology. They've had these materials stashed away in the hangars of aerospace giants and defense contractors for decades, and they haven't been able to make much progress in figuring out the technology. We know that the Russians and the Chinese are also in a race for that technology, and whoever gets it, whoever builds it, whoever duplicates it, wins. It is so extraordinary what these things are capable of.
We're going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
David Rush appears before Congress, testifies under oath that we have in fact recovered discs of unknown origin and craft of unknown origin, that we have the material, that we have bodies, and we've been studying this stuff, and we haven't figured it out. And it is stashed in the deepest, darkest corners of the U.S. government, and they are never going to let it out.
BTLV. Explorez l'inconnu. Découvrez l'inattendu.
Explore the unknown. Discover the unexpected.
Here's what George Knapp said when he came on BTLV. The show was available to you, of course, since he was watching us. George Knapp says something very interesting. He says, well, we need to figure out this technology. When you look at these objects today, transmedium, they make erratic movements. They go from the sky to the water in a matter of seconds. They skim the surface. They don't even make the water move. Do you think we've only barely understood a part of this technology so far?
I do. The scientists have a working theory. In fact, it's up until 2015, my government was focused on doing research to try to explain the 5 separate observables. What type of technologies could be responsible? What type of exotic technologies could be responsible for the 5 performance observables? And those observables are instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, transmedium travel, low observability, and anti-gravity. And so it wasn't until 2015 that the Pentagon had the what we call the aha moment, where they realized that all of these 5 performance observables may be a result of a single technology, one. And it might even dictate the shape of the craft as well. And it all has to do with its propulsion unit and the ability to insulate the craft, whatever this vehicle is inside, in somewhat of a warp bubble, a localized area of space-time that is different. There's a delta. It's different than the space-time construct around it. And so therefore, a lot of the observables that we see, like instantaneous acceleration and hypersonic velocity, is really related to relativity and Einstein's relativity. So if you have one space-time here in a localized area and then around it a different space-time, well, the way you would observe that bubble would be different than being inside that bubble you would observe outwardly, meaning if you were inside that bubble looking out, everything would be moving in slow motion. But if you're outside the bubble looking in, everything appears inside that bubble to be moving very, very fast. And it has to do, again, with the notion of insulating, creating a bubble that insulates the craft from space-time by creating a warp bubble in common parlance.
That's actually what Alputov says. That's his theory. That is, we can observe a UFO while we're in our own reality, and the UFO is in another reality. That's also what a French physicist we've had here says. His name is Philippe Guillemot. Maybe I should send you the show so you can watch it, because he has exactly the same theory. Now, there is something that is quite significant in the United States, which is you have a president who takes the oath of office on the Bible. Religion is very, very important. The Christian religion is very important in the United States. And so in your book, we understand that you are going to be confronted within the government itself by religious extremists, the Collins elite, and that ultimately for them, for those members, these objects are demons. You're going to be quite taken aback when you learn all of this.
Yeah, and a little bit disappointing. I myself am a religious person, but I also understand there is a separation in my country between church and state. And that's a sacred separation for several reasons. And it's not just to protect the government from religious influence. It's also there to protect the religion from government influence. And so that's a sacred rule we have. And so when you have individuals in the government that are expressing their religious views and making decisions, national security decisions based upon religious or philosophical beliefs, I think that's problematic. But at the same time, we have a bit of a schizophrenic approach to that in my country, because when people swear, like you said, on the Bible, and we also have our Pledge of Allegiance, where it's one nation under God, right? So we have a lot of these religious notions that are part of the moral fabric of our nation. In fact, if you go back to the original forefathers of our nation, look at George Washington and some of these other folks, they belong to the Freemasons. The Freemasons is not necessarily a Judeo-Christian religious sect, but it does have its roots in some religious beliefs and practices and even ceremonies. So there's always been a deep relationship between religion and my government. Unfortunately, sometimes that relationship is inappropriate. And I saw that firsthand when I was at the Pentagon regarding the study of UFOs. There were people there that did not want us looking into UFOs, not because they were not real, but because in their mind, it represented something demonic. It represented something anti-Christian. And that was very surprising to me.
It may sound crazy, but indeed, that's also, well, the feeling of a certain segment of the American population. So we're going to wrap up this interview. And if you don't mind, I'll keep about 20 minutes to go back to where we started. As I mentioned earlier, at the very beginning of the show, you decided to speak out, and it cost you financially, personally, and even maritally. Because when you tell your wife that you're going to leave the American government, she wonders why. You have a good position. The girls are in college and you're going to end up living in a trailer. In other words, for you, well, it's going to be a bit complicated. You were even afraid when you announced your resignation. You left very quickly because you were scared of being arrested. And that's what you read. And it seems completely crazy. And you get the feeling you're in a movie, like he knows too much, so he has to be kept hidden away. Why? Luis Elizondo, did the world need to know to the point that you had to lose your job and resign?
I have to go back to the beginning. My father, let me share a story with you. I took an oath a long time ago to defend my country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I have yet to be relieved of that oath. 2 years ago, last summer, my father passed away. And a month before he passed away, I knew he was very sick. He never told me, but I knew he was sick, and my time was limited. So I had a chance, an opportunity to drive with my father from where I live here in Wyoming for about 3 days down to Florida. And about halfway through the trip, I asked my father a question. I said, Dad, what is the greatest threat to humanity, in your opinion? And I'm thinking to myself, perhaps it's a global disease like a pandemic, perhaps it's international terrorism. My father looked at me and he said, son, the greatest threat to all humans is corruption. And I thought for a moment, I said, corruption? Like financial corruption? He said, no, son, any corruption. Corruption is the act of giving a core value away in exchange for something else. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's notoriety, sometimes fill in the blank, whatever you want. But anytime you have corruption, whether it's financial corruption, religious corruption, governmental corruption, especially in government, when you have corruption, it slowly erodes the very foundation of democracy. And when that happens, it's a very quick slide down into total tyranny. And so when you have what forced me to come out, why I gave everything up and why I lived in a trailer and I almost went bankrupt and lost everything and have been threatened with my life, is because I took that oath a long time ago to defend this country. And when you have people in government making decisions that are illegal, meaning they're not informing Congress, they're not informing the president, that is a corrupt act. And I believe it goes against the very ethos, the very principles of what democracy is. Let's not forget, France and the U.S. have had a long and very intimate relationship with one another. Our independence as a nation was because of France. And France, of course, had a revolution inspired by one of ours. Freedom is sacred. Liberty is sacred. I've been to war and I've been in combat many times to preserve democracy and to preserve liberty and to preserve freedom. It just turned out in this particular case, the enemy wasn't Al-Qaeda or ISIS. In this particular case, it was the bureaucracy. It was a corrupt bureaucracy that was dangerous because it was not functioning properly. It wasn't functioning without proper oversight. And that's why I did what I did, because my father happens to know a little bit about what tyranny is like. He lived in a tyrannical government in Cuba and came to the United States to find freedom. I fought in wars to preserve freedom and democracy and liberty. And so if I'm going to go to a battlefield in the deserts or the jungles to protect liberty, why wouldn't I take it to the halls of Congress? It's just another battle. That's the way.
It's a battle that, as you said, actually led you to bankruptcy, to living in a caravan. You say that in the evening you clear your desk, which then becomes the table where you have dinner with your wife and one of your daughters because the other is at university. There is someone who is going to reach out to you, and that's Tom DeLonge from Blink-182, a very famous rock singer whom all rock and roll lovers know well. Unfortunately, To the Star Academy won't generate the money you were hoping for, so it will be let go and you will be freed. Still, someone will reach out to you. I know that Senator Ararid was also important to you. He never abandoned you. And that was a good thing. But we're soon coming to the end of this interview. Do you think, Luis Elizondo, that in the next 10 years, because in the end, there are two kinds of extraterrestrial research. There is scientific biological research. We see that today we've detected signs on Mars, that there may be ancient traces of life there. James Webb is searching for signs all over the place. And then there's the search for extraterrestrial life through the UFO phenomenon. Do you think the two could actually come together? Because it feels like there's a bit of a war between biological science and ufological science, if we can even call it a science. And do you think there will ever be an official announcement? Yes, there is life elsewhere in the universe. And it comes to visit us.
Well, I believe some of that conversation's already happened. We already had a former CIA director Woolsey, who came out and just the reality of some of these UAP encounter. We had a former director of national intelligence, Radcliffe, who's now the director of CIA, who also came out and admitted formally that UAP are real, whatever they are. And we had a former president of the United States, Barack Obama, do it. And so at the end of the day, I think we've had that confirmation. Plus, you have it from the members of Congress and whistleblowers. So I'm not sure what more people are waiting for. At the end of the day, I'm not sure I trust a politician more than I trust anybody else. If you're waiting for a politician to tell you the truth, you may be waiting a long time. I think this is a conversation that belongs in the hands of the people. I do not think we need to rely on government to tell us if something is real. I don't need the government to tell me that an ocean is real. I don't need the government to tell me that clouds are real. I don't need the government to tell me that. I think the government is certainly changing its position now officially on this topic. If you listen to what some of the lawmakers in my country are telling the American people based upon meetings that they're having with the FBI, I think we're there. I think now the question is, what do we do about it, and how does it apply to all of us, and how do we work together on it? But as far as disclosure, I think, as I've always said before, disclosure is a process. It's not an event, and I think we're well down the road of that process. As far as the competition between NASA and other efforts, let me leave you with this. We spend billions of dollars each year through NASA trying to find microbial life on other planets, to include Mars. We spend millions of dollars each year looking through radio telescopes to find what we call techno-signatures of intelligent life in our cosmos. In the billions of years this planet has been here, is it possible that in our search for intelligent life in the cosmos, that life has found us first? And I think there's a high degree of probability, statistically anyways, that is the case.
So it's true that no scientist today refutes this. That is to say, the probability that life has developed elsewhere is mathematically 100%. That's certain given the number of stars, the number of suns, and so on. We've talked about it, you've mentioned it a little. The GAPAN in France is an official unit that studies this phenomenon. When you were at AATIP, did you have any interactions with GAPAN or other foreign offices on this subject?
So I have to be very careful. I do not have permission by other countries to express the level of cooperation they extended towards us. I don't have permission by those countries to discuss those details. Clearly, it's important for us to work with other countries. As a case in point, my country recently entered into a bilateral information sharing agreement with Japan for the sole purposes of sharing UFO-related information. So there should be no surprise that my country is always looking for opportunities to partner with allies on a lot of topics, a lot of different topics. UFOs shouldn't be any different. People should not be surprised that we are working with other countries. The problem is I do not have the liberty right now to say which countries those were, because I do not have permission from those countries to have that conversation. That's something you would have to ask Japan.
So we've written a lot of articles about the agencies operating in Japan. Indeed, there are some, and they've revived the research. In France, we know that GAPAN has existed for many, many years. We get the sense that, therefore, the Trump administration and the Republicans are more inclined to try to uncover things. As proof, take Marco Rubio, who, before becoming Minister of Foreign Affairs, took an interest in this subject several times. He was a senator from Florida, I believe, and he looked into this matter. Ana Paulina Luna, also from the Republican Party, wants to know as well. Do you get the feeling that with this administration, things will move a bit faster?
It is, but it's not just the administration. There are individuals in the administration, in the executive branch under Trump, that are very interested in learning the truth about this topic and having a conversation with the American people. There's also people in our Congress, the other side of our government, the legislative branch. People like you said, Marco Rubio, who was there before he jumped over to be on the administration. You have Senator Mike Rounds and Senator Chuck Schumer and my old boss, Senator Harry Reid. You have members on the House side. So you have, like you said, Rep. Luna, Burchett, Burleson. There's a lot of people right now that are working very, very hard behind the scenes in the interests of the American people. They want the truth to come out. And every day that goes by, they're learning more and more information from elements in our government. Luna just made a statement 3 days ago where she said that the FBI gave her a wonderful briefing, 10 out of 10. And it seems to be going against the opinion of AARO, which was the organization set up a couple years ago, which doesn't have a very good track record right now. So the FBI is being forthcoming. There's also elements in the intelligence community and also elements in the Department of Defense that are coming forward, and they're going around AARO and they are reporting to Congress, which I think is a good thing. Finally, the truth is getting out to the people that need to know the truth. I'm very, very optimistic to see where this is going. Our members of Congress, very rarely do politicians agree on anything. But this is one of the only topics that I can remember in recent history where both Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, are working together to bring the truth to the American people. So I'm extremely encouraged by that.
Last question, Luis Elizondo. We've mentioned it and you've seen it, the AARO logo. What's your impression of it? People often compare it to the Blue Book project, meaning it feels like there's interest, but it's just the tree that hides the forest.
So AARO was established in probably not an ideal situation. AARO was forced upon the Department of Defense through a congressional act. And the Department of Defense decided they would very quickly set it up their own way. The first year and a half of AARO was an utter failure. Reports came back with glaring errors. They omitted a lot of information. And the former director and deputy director were less than transparent. They had an agenda to squelch the truth. Now, with the new director of AARO, we're seeing a complete 180-degree turn. We're hearing statements by the AARO director that they are picking up things on sensors that they can't explain, that defy any understanding of physics. So we're beginning to see a change of direction by AARO. It was, I would agree with you, that it was definitely more or less a blue book initially, there to just try to cover and conceal. But I think things are changing now because there is so much political pressure now, both internally to the U.S. government and the executive branch, and then, of course, externally with the legislative branch, that it's becoming almost impossible at this point to deny the reality. Because as information goes to AARO doesn't know, but some of that information is also going to Congress. There's people that are hedging their bets because they don't trust AARO, and they're going to the FBI. Because they trust the FBI, they trust Congress more than they do AARO. So it's a shame it's that way, but AARO did that to themselves. I do have hopes that they are going to continue to change in the right direction, make changes in the right direction, and hopefully in the near future it will actually be a successful organization.
We have reached the end of this interview. Let me remind everyone that you are the author of The Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs, Eminence Luis Elizondo, former head of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program at the Department of Defense. The book is published by Guy Tredaniel on the French side. I wanted to thank you 1,000 times for coming. I really wanted to have you on BTLV.
A privilege, and thank you for what you're doing, and thank you to your wonderful audience for taking this topic seriously. It is a serious topic, and I am fortunate to have had a small part in it.
I'm going to have Avi Loeb on in a few weeks. Do you have a question you'd like me to ask him?
As I would ask Avi Loeb when the results, he expects the results from their the expedition they recently took out in the Pacific Ocean. That will be very interesting.
Well, I hope they give us the answer. In any case, 1,000 thanks to Luis Elizondo for being with us. We hope you will continue to provide us with information, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye. That concludes the interview we wanted to have with Luis Elizondo. It was a real pleasure. I hope the UFO topic interests you as much as it does us. I invite you to watch George Knapp's show, which is already online, as well as all the other shows we've done on the phenomenon. Salute.